Hey guys, welcome and thanks for joining me today. If you are new to my channel, I am a homeschooling mom of three. I have a first grader, kindergartner, and a toddler. I'm also a second generation homeschooler, and this channel is everything and anything homeschool. So if you like this kind of content, go ahead and subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the things. But today is less in the nature of a let me show you guys a cool resource or share with you my thoughts on something and more just me mulling over something that I've kind of had in my mind over the last few weeks, and I've been trying to get solidified in my own mind. Um, I'm not normally a verbal processor, but sometimes it can really help to articulate things to somebody else to help things solidify in your own mind and really understand the way your thoughts are working. So we're going to try that out with you guys today. So if this is not fully comprehensive and you're not fully understanding, please ask any questions because, again, this is just me kind of talking through something that I've been thinking about. I'm also welcome any feedback you guys have for me on this topic. So please, opinions, thoughts, questions, share them with me. All of that helps me and just kind of think through. But my kids are playing. My youngest is napping. I have a candle, I have a book, and I have coffee. So life is pretty good. And we're going to just kind of chat. So this thought process kind of sparked as I'd been reading this book. I mentioned a while ago that I was thinking of reading this book, Climbing Parnassus. It's a new apologia for Greek and Latin. And I was interested in reading this because I hadn't decided if we were interested in doing Latin in our homeschool or not. And just before you guys click off, this is not going to be about Latin today. But in this conversation about why the author believes Latin is valuable, is the thought of Latin helps you develop your brain, helps you think very specifically and carefully. And he's going through history, talking about how it was used in history, how it was used, who used it as our founding fathers, what they thought it brought to the table. He's going through a lot of history, a lot of thought process, a lot of following it throughout the ages. But he brought some other point along the way in my mind. And one of the things he brought up, well, I can read you the quote that really kind of caught my attention, has been sparking this kind of thought in my mind. It says, it's very short, because it's been talking about education as a whole in this, not just Greek and Latin, but education, how Greek and Latin play a part. But this quote on education just kind of made me stop and go, oh, okay. So it says, many of us now insist on viewing education exclusively as a performing or an informative, but not a formative role. And that caught my attention because I do think that education at large now is focused on information rather than formation. And I'm not against information. So I'm just talking. But even in myself, there are things that I'm like, oh, they need to know these things. They need to know these things. There's expectations of things they should know without even wondering why those expectations are there. It's just like this is the information they need to know to be able to, perform a good job, to be able to be useful in society, to do these things. Very informative, very useful knowledge versus this time of education is to form their mind, to form their person. Which I'm not saying there is not information they need to do. There is information they need to know. But am I viewing my education as here's the child, this is the stuff they need to know, or here's the child, let's teach them to think. Let's teach them to use their brain. Let's teach them to understand. Let's teach them to have character and morals and values and be a person that is a useful person to society because of who they are, not because of the information they've learned. And as I've been thinking about this, I've been thinking about it even in terms of there's all this fear right now that AI is going to take away people's jobs, right? Because AI and the internet and computers, there's so much information out there that we are becoming unnecessary in some roles. And so even thinking about it from that terms, I can give my kids all this information, but they have that at their fingertips on the computer, right? AI is going to be removing that. But one thing that AI cannot take over is people of character who can think well and who can express themselves well. Those kind of people will always be valued and valuable to society, no matter what kind of information we have out there being used in other ways, right? AI can never replace a person of moral character and a person who thinks clearly and truthfully and who can communicate clearly and truthfully. And so, again, I'm not saying that there aren't things that I do want my children to know. There's information that I want them to know, right? A computer might have a calculator on it for all of us. We have one in our pockets on our phones, but I still want my kids to know what 2 plus 2 is, what the timetables are, just because those are things that help them. But my sole goal in math is not for them to be able to calculate like a computer. My goal in math is also for them to learn how the world works, because math is really integral in how the physical world works, right? In sciences, you need math. Um, so I want them to understand that there is truth, that there's absolutes, that things are orderly, that there is an order to things. Like all these things you gain from math, thinking logically, thinking procedurally, you can't miss steps. So being careful, all of these things are things that form them as a person in learning these things alongside the benefit of now they also have this knowledge and they don't need a calculator to add 3 numbers together. So while I'm not like, as I'm thinking, I'm not like, oh, get rid of all information in our homeschool and focus purely on formation, because that's not useful either. But where is that balance of, am I focusing too much on information and not on who this individual is going to be and how their brain works? Um, so it's just really intrigued me because it's so much easier, and this book actually points this out. It's so much easier to test and evaluate and educate for information. It's so much easier to be like, oh, this is the list of facts I want them to have. Do they have that facts? These are, let's give it to them. Do they have them? Like, that's so much easier to evaluate and assess and figure out how to do than to be like, I want my child to think logically, to think clearly, to think precisely, to be able to evaluate and weigh information. Like, that is so much harder for me to figure out how to give my child and how to figure out if I've successfully given it to them. Um, and so part of it's intimidating to me, the whole thought of like, well, if I'm going to assess my homeschool for, am I not just informing, but also forming their minds? And not that God didn't give them the mind they have. I'm also not saying I have the power to make them whoever I want to be. That is not what I'm saying. Um, but I do have this responsibility to help them and to take the mind that they have and form it to be the best of itself that it can be. That's what I'm saying. I'm not trying to make a whole bunch of little mini, I'm forming you all into what I want, but they are something, and they have so much um, potential. And I want to use their potential and help them gain their potential, help them to be self-governing, self-teaching, self-controlled, self well, good thinkers. Like all of these things are things that are formative, not just informative. Um, so in that, and like I said, I'm still thinking through this. It's so much harder for me to think about than just like have a list of things that I want to teach them. But it's been challenging me to go through my curriculum, especially as I'm starting, because I start way in advance. You guys aren't surprised if you've been here long, but I'm starting to think about next year's curriculum, and solidifying some of those picks and thinking through the things that I don't know. And some of the things I've already had picked out for a while, some of the things I have known that I need to start thinking about. But as I'm going through those, I've been evaluating the picks that I have already this year and the ones that I had for next year and going, are these things merely information, or do they have value outside that? Because so if like to pick on one that I've been actually particularly thinking through and delving through, and I think I've come to a happy spot with. So for geography, my older daughter is the one who's really been doing geography currently. She's been doing mapping, which is awesome. That's formative as well as informative. That's a skill, right? You're seeing something, you're able to put it on paper, you're training your hand to do what your eye sees, so physical formation, but also it's informing her about our world at large. And so I think those two are a good compromise of formative and informative. And then along with that, she's been doing a geography workbook this year, with just, basic mapping skills or directional information or landform information, right? But when I'm looking at that, I'm like, it's just, she reads a little script and then she answers questions. She's really being given information and putting information on the page without having, I mean, she understands to some extent, but it's just filling her mind with pieces. Now, again, these pieces aren't necessarily bad, and not that I don't want her to have this information. I want her to understand how to read a map and to know the landforms and all this. But is there a way to do this that is not just information? Is there a way to help form her as a person along with informing her of the information that will be useful to her in life? And so I was just thinking through that, and I was thinking, okay, well, what if we come at street geography instead of coming in it solely as um, a land or a mapped out kind of geography? I don't know if that makes any sense. A physical, like looking at the world. What if we come at it from the people who live in these places, right? So what if we take a country, um, and we focus a little bit on the people and how they live, right? Because that is formative, right? If my kids look at Madagascar. I don't know hardly anything about Madagascar. I'm just picking one, guys. And they look at the way the children live there. And they look at the education the kids get, and the type of food they eat, and what they wear, and at what age they're expected to work. Um, what kind of health conditions they live in. Do they have clean water and food, or do they not? Like all these questions that we could ask. If we look at them, that gives my kids such a fuller picture of the world and the privileges they have. Because I'm just going to say it, my kids are so privileged compared to a large portion of the world population. My kids are privileged. They just are. We live in the US. We are not poor. We have so much. And I don't think they understand how much they have. And so coming at geography from an aspect of people, not just, landforms and maps, um, but to understand what other people don't have and what other people would like to have and how we can be praying for them. And to understand that. And then alongside that, let's pull in some of this information that I also think is valuable. Like, okay, if we're going to study Madagascar, let's at the same time look up any mountains Madagascar might have. Look up any rivers, any landforms that are significant. Let's mark it on the globe and color it in on a world map. Like we can do all these things while the focus is the people and understanding the differences in the way people live, the similarities in the way people live, the privileges that some people have, the hardships that other people have, the growth that some people have, what different people eat, and just understanding just that the world is not all like us, because I think that's dangerous to a child to think that everybody lives like you, and it becomes just so self-focused. And so I think focusing on other people's can help your child take their focus off themselves and their life and realize that not everybody is like them. And that's a really good thing to understand. That's kind of an example of taking something like a workbook that's just giving you the landforms, just giving you the specific geography content, and trying to shift it into something that's more formative of character and mind and viewpoint and worldview, right? Looking at the way people live helps kind of shift your worldview, whereas just studying a map only focuses on the mapping. So for next year, I'm looking at moving away from that workbook into something more like I said, and I kind of have plans. And I might with you if as I solidify those plans, I might share with you an entire video just on how I plan to do geography because I'm kind of excited about what I've been thinking. So continuing with the mapping skills, helping understand kind of how the world goes together with countries and continents and lakes and using that skill to become an art skill as well. But then moving away from just the geographical terminology, the geographical understanding, also the understanding of the world at large, and tying those two together. Again, not discrediting that they need to know about the rivers and landforms and mountains and all those plateaus, whatever, but that there's more to it than that, and that they can understand the world better if they understand more. And so forming just their viewpoint, their outlook, the way they see things, alongside giving them that information. So that's an example for one subject. So yeah, it's just been something that it's hard. It's hard. It's much easier for me to take a workbook and be like, yeah, let's learn on geography terms than it is for me to try and figure out how to do um, the idea of forming their minds rather than just filling their minds. Um, And again, I'm not anti-information. I do believe memorization is excellent, and we will be doing memorization next year. We memorize scripture verses, but I think having those in your heart is very formative. We memorize poetry, and that is not just for the memorization, but for the formation of language, spoken language, and having really good written language in your mind to pull from. So again, that's a formative piece. We will probably be doing some other pieces of memorization, but for a purpose, a forming purpose, not just to have the facts. So, yeah, I'm trying to mull it over in my mind. I'm trying to figure it out. Where is the things that they do need to know? Because there is information they need to know. You guys know I want to give my kids a really high top quality education. Like I want them to have everything they need when they're done. So I'm not saying ignore all this stuff and let's just focus on um I don't know. I feel like this could be taken out of context and pulled badly because I don't want to neglect my child's education in favor of character reform. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think there is something to be said for a person who has a really well-formed mind and not just an informed mind. Because you can inform people to any point of view. Because we have so many different worldviews, you see that people are taught to believe this rather than taught to think about all the options and figure out where truth is and where truth isn't. And I want my children to have an informed mind that can look at all of these things and say, yes, this works and no, this doesn't, and know why they believe that. So I am now, like I said, going through all our curriculum and trying to evaluate what I have in there and what things are serving the purpose of both formation and information, and what things are serving solely information and need to change. And I don't like that. Well, not that I don't like that, but it does intimidate me because I do think it's much harder to teach for the formation purposes. So there's a few subjects that I kind of have in my mind as flagged as I think I need to reevaluate those pieces of curriculum and figure out something else. Um, and some things are just fine. Some things I'll leave as is that I still feel like do both. But it's just really stretching my mind to figure out how to do that and to figure out, like, it's easy to say, oh, yes, we need to form our children, not just inform our children or form their minds, form their muscles, their mind and muscles, not just inform them. But then when you go, okay, now practically, what does that look like? It's like, I don't know. Um, and so trying to take it out of that, I don't know, into some practical, it feels big. It feels big to me. It feels like a lot of work. And I'm not going to shy away from that just because it's a lot of work, but it does feel like a lot. So I would value your input, guys. Honestly, if you have thoughts for me on helping me clarify my own thoughts or recommendations for subjects or resources that you feel like really do a good job at formation and not just information, but kind of pulling what you need of information in the process of formation, I would value that input. So please, any resources or thoughts or specific curriculums you would be like, oh, you should look at this if that's what you're thinking. I would welcome any of those. And like I said, if there's any questions on what I've been thinking, um, let me know. I am still finishing this book. Like I said, was really focused on me trying to figure out if we're going to do Greek and Latin. And I have not quite finished, but when I'm done, if I can get my thoughts together enough for you guys, because I feel like this has been a really challenging read for my brain to wrap itself around. Good, but really challenging. I might do something in terms of sharing with you kind of my thoughts on those and what we're going to be doing with that as well. But that's for another video. So thanks for sticking around, guys. Again, any thoughts you have for me are super welcome on this. You can tell I don't really feel like I have it at all cemented in my mind. I don't even know quite what I think. I know that I know some of what I think, but I feel like there's a lot kind of like floating out here that are not clarified thoughts. They're kind of nebulous thoughts, for the lack of a better term. So again, thanks for sticking around. I appreciate you guys.